I think I've told the story a few times now, but following Revenge of the Sith, us Star Wars fans were left with lingering questions about what was next. Of course, the books, comics, and games kept coming, but as the heat simmered on Revenge of the Sith, the big question on our mind was, what's next? Which was eventually answered when we got the Clone Wars film that came out in theaters and was the theatrical pilot for Star Wars' next big TV show, and arguably the first full-length TV show of much consequence in the wider Star Wars lore. Remember, before this we had cartoons like Droids and Ewoks and the original Clone Wars micro series, and that was all we really had in terms of Star Wars on TV, though eventually this show was announced to follow the original animated film, and as a kid I ate this up, the first season being one I remember the most. I only watched the first 2 seasons as they originally aired, not because I didn't want to see the rest, but because cable television was expensive at the time and a Netflix subscription was cheap. And back then, with no competition, Netflix more or less had everything you'd want. Studios wanted their shit on Netflix at the time, rather than now it seems studios want their own Netflix. Anyhow, basically, my family could save $70 a month or something canceling cable and getting Netflix, so that's what we did, and I fell off of the show. But I will say, the stuff I saw as a kid I largely enjoyed, the 2 episodes I watched repeatedly being the lair of General Grievous and Rookies, since I liked those the best growing up, and I downloaded them onto my iPod Nano back in the day. I remember a time in my life when I would genuinely sit down and watch shit on this thing. Needless to say, it wasn't ideal, but it was a hell of a lot better than the older devices you could watch shows on like the Video Now or Game Boy Advanced. Remember those things? Okay, so much of the development of this show as it pertains to getting it off the ground I already covered previously in my Clone Wars film retrospective. Check that out if you want on my larger Star Wars playlist, which will be linked at the end. But basically, George Lucas planned on making a Star Wars cartoon that he wanted to fill the gap between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. He had a bigger hand in this show than most of the extended universe stuff of the era, most of which he would loosely consult on for the broad direction and little else. Though occasionally, like this show, he would pick up a pet project. The show eventually becoming so lore important and popular that at the time of the reboot to the modern day Disney canon, it, the film pilot, and the core 6 movies were the only thing pulled into canon as of 2014. Though of course the EU still has influences on the modern canon, and some stuff would later be adapted to the canon through source books and real books. For example, the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy recanonized many of the events of the Outbound Flight novel. That is an unnecessary aside though. Basically, George wanted to make around 100 episodes of the Clone Wars and hoped that the show would do 5 seasons. That would thoroughly link the time between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, though if we're getting really technical, it's all the stuff between the original Clone Wars show, the first volume, and its second, since that covers the early and late Clone Wars. Though that being decanonized led to the tie-ins to Revenge of the Sith we see in Season 7, which is not canon to Legends, just to put that out there. Anyhow, eventually the first season of Lucas's planned 5 would start airing on October 3rd, 2008, with the first 2 episodes of the series, Ambush and Rising Malevolence, dropping on the same day. And yes, the day after they aired, I did buy them on iTunes to load onto my iPod Nano. The season takes place fairly early in the Clone Wars, this season taking place in 22 and 21 BBY. It's actually different between canon and Legends. In Legends, it takes place in 21 BBY, and in canon, it takes place in 22 BBY. Anyhow, Ambush is the series premiere and follows Yoda on Ragosa, attempting to get the king of the region, Katuko, to maintain standing in the Republic and allow them to build a base in his territory, as Asajj Ventress appears on the planet to foil Yoda and tempt them to get in on the Separatist cause, claiming the Republic can't protect them. Asajj challenges Yoda to a skirmish, trying to prove that her droids can outmaneuver Yoda and his clones. Of course, if Asajj is gonna swing for the king, she better not miss.
You come at the king, you best not miss.
Anyhow, she does miss, and Katuko pledges loyalty to the Republic. The format for the series is set up in this episode, sort of a wartime documentary style opening with a voiceover recap that works quicker and easier for potential younger viewers than your average Star Wars title crawl from the films. I think Asajj Ventress and Yoda bumping heads is really random, but it shows the show is willing to just put any combination of characters together as long as they're within the era, which I think leads to many cool and interesting crossovers. This episode is a one-off, which appear here and there, but the show's format also allows multiple parts, which are in fact pretty common in this season. I do think this wasn't the banger of an episode I would have started on, and with the film kind of being a mixed bag itself, I do say for people who haven't seen this show, it does get better. If they could do it over, I would lead in with Lair of General Grievous, but whatever. Still a decent episode, but it does feel a bit like we're starting on filler here. Alright, following the one-off pilot episode, we move right into our first multi-episode story with the Malevolence arc, taking place across Rising Malevolence, Shadow of Malevolence, and Destroy Malevolence. Jedi Master Plo Koon and his clone Captain Wolf found General Grievous's flagship, the Malevolence, with the Malevolence having a giant super weapon on it that can totally cripple ships, allowing for the Separatists to pick off Republic ships from there one by one. With Plo Koon's fleet meeting the power of the Malevolence and going dark, with the Republic assuming the fleet was destroyed. Despite widespread assumption it is too dangerous to mount a rescue, Ahsoka wants to head out there and save who they can. As Plo Koon and Wolf watch their comrades picked apart by the Separatist armies one by one. Eventually, Anakin and Ahsoka narrowly save Plo Koon and his troops, but narrowly. Anakin decides to lead a counter-strike on Malevolence, with the Jedi forming a squad of 12 Y-Wings to strike back, hopefully crippling the ship from its bridge. Meanwhile, Grievous is to attack Collidial Shoals Medical Center, which holds thousands of injured clone troopers. Anyhow, Anakin's assault wounds the Malevolence, but at the cost of many of his ships. The ship flies back to Separatist space, though the Republic plans to strike a decisive blow. Meanwhile, Padme attempts to negotiate, but ends up captured, meaning they have to mount a rescue. Anakin and Padme eventually meeting up and stopping the ship from jumping to hyperspace, and the ship is destroyed after Obi-Wan duels General Grievous. I like that this arc has 3 different story types for Star Wars wrapped into these 3 episodes. You have ship stuff with the first and second episode, some political stuff with Padme, and Jedi shenanigans with the Jedi's assault on the Malevolence in the final part. Also including the classic super weapon plot as a way to add urgency is such a key Star Wars thing to do. Not only in the original trilogy with the 2 Death Stars, but later throughout the extended universe with things like the Sun Crusher and the Eye of Palpatine, and of course in canon you have the Starkiller base. This episode has Wolf, who's another clone trooper that adds some personality to them, and one thing I think was amazing about this show is that you can more or less make one guy have tons of different personalities and motivations. The clones are, in a way, the heart of the show, and fleshing them out is very important, with the films themselves not really taking the time nor having the time to do so. One thing I really don't understand is the Med Satellite as a safe place to hold thousands of injured troops with no defenses. I think you could just mount an assault on it really easily, super weapon or not, and blow it up, killing thousands of troops before they ever have a chance to get back to the battlefield. It doesn't seem to have a flanking fleet or anything. Why not just put an outpost in every sector for healthcare on the ground? That just seems like a flying target in my opinion. I ultimately think this was a good trilogy of episodes though. It shows how ready they were to do convincing approximations of the film's lightsaber duels, gunfights, and dogfights, and it really feels like a sample platter of what the show would end up being. Honestly, going back to Ambush, being kind of a weird choice for the pilot, I think this could have been a good 3-part event to open the show. Overall, I like this one. Rookies is the first episode of the series to not really follow a Jedi as the protagonist, with characters like Anakin and Obi-Wan taking a back seat in this one-off adventure. As a kid, this was up there as one of my favorite episodes of the season, and honestly, I think the format of the show has made this episode nearly perfect. On Rishi's moon, a group of fresh clone troopers, Heavy, Echo, Fives, Droidbait, Sergeant O'Near, and Cut Up, are hanging out on a seemingly unimportant base, doing seemingly unimportant work.
Nothing going on, as usual.
Until a Separatist invasion force comes to take the sparsely guarded base, led by a deadly assassin droid. However, as this is happening, Commander Cody and Captain Rex are en route to the base for a Passover inspection. The droids make it there first, killing the sergeant and droid bait, prompting the clone squad to flee till the higher-ups come for their inspection to hopefully help them out. Cut Up is pretty quickly killed off, as well as Rishi L, as Cody and Rex arrive to see what's going on. Rex and Cody pretty quickly figure out some bullshit is amiss when they catch and destroy an assassin droid. They're forced to flee but meet up with the rest of the clones and rally the troops to attempt to fight off the droids. Overrun, they decide to blow up the base, but when the detonator fails, Heavy is forced to sacrifice himself by manually blowing up the detonator, destroying many of the droids and buying the Republic fleet time to jump into real space over the planet and engage the Separatists, which sees them flee. The survivors, Echo and Fives, are added to Anakin's 501st unit, and the episode ends on somewhat of an optimistic note. I've seen this episode dozens of times. It's nearly perfect, honestly. Previously in the films, the clones were all just CGI cannon fodder in the background, Cody being the closest thing we got to a fleshed out clone with like a total of 3 lines or something. This episode, I think, brings to screen the potential for these clones to really be seen as individuals, not only people to die standing behind the Jedi. It also shows how hazardous the job is. Most of the clones don't make it out, and that's something I found kind of interesting. The clones being on a boring reporting station far off the front lines is also interesting. They desire to join the war and finally see the reality of that when the droids come to attack. We also learn more about Rex and Cody as characters, and being that they're tied to Anakin and Obi-Wan respectively, we will be seeing these two a lot throughout the series, so it's important to get some introduction to these characters. The episode also builds on the darker tone of the Malevolence trilogy, proving that this show wasn't going to be totally neutered for being a cartoon on a cartoon station. A concern I remember having as a kid and hearing echoed a bit by the fan base early on. Downfall of the Droids and Duel of the Droids is a 2-part story arc. Anakin is trying to knock out Grievous, still, who continues to be up to no good. Though during a battle, R2-D2, Anakin's trusty astromech, is lost. Obi-Wan tells him to forget R2 and that basically it's the rules to just kind of let him go, but Anakin admits that he doesn't wipe R2's memory the way he's supposed to. This can lead to some serious issues, of course, if the Separatists probe the droid and Republic secrets get out. Anakin heads on a mission to save R2 with his apprentice Ahsoka, the duo being assigned a new astromech droid, R3-S6, or Goldie. R2 is captured on a freighter, and the duo and Goldie investigate, but Goldie keeps messing up and almost getting them killed. R2 is led to Grievous, though the droid eventually manages to send out a beacon to Anakin and Ahsoka, and they head for a rescue on a moon in the Rusan system. Ahsoka ends up dueling Grievous as Anakin searches for the droids and Goldie keeps causing issues. Ahsoka's hunted, but Anakin blows up the base, and R3 is destroyed after getting in an epic duel with R2. This is a pretty solid duology. This episode focuses on droids, another change of pace for the Star Wars universe. I think the bond between R2 and Anakin is great, and the staff personifies the droids well, as they do everything else. R3 as a droid spy is an interesting enough idea. I think my favorite part of the whole thing, realistically though, is Grievous hunting Ahsoka in that one scene.
Ahsoka, we're in the reactor.
Your friends won't help you. You're stuck with me.
That is very intense. Grievous in Revenge of the Sith has a funnish fight scene, but during his time in the original Clone Wars show, he seemed like a horror movie villain, like a Jedi killing monster, which as a kid I was kind of spooked by, to be honest. No! And I think the Clone Wars tries to capture that a bit more than the film, which just kind of sees him as cool guy with 4 lightsabers. It's good enough, but I don't think it's the most memorable set of episodes, if I'm being honest. Bombad Jedi was fucking bold, to say the least. This was 2008, at a time where you could probably count the amount of people who didn't hate Jar Jar on one hand, and with good reason. Jar Jar sucked in The Phantom Menace, I'm gonna be honest. I know there's some defenders now, but come on. Somehow, though, the Clone Wars would lean into that concept and I think actually made something so weird that it kinda worked. Padme is on a mission to Rhodia with C-3PO and Jar Jar Binks in hopes to convince its king, Anaconda Farr, who is an old friend of Padme's, to join the Republic, though upon arrival, she is incarcerated because Farr has already pledged Rhodia to the Separatists. The battle droid army in the city also hopes to grab C-3PO and Jar Jar, but Jar Jar starts messing with them, eventually finding one of Anakin's spare robes on Padme's ship and being mistaken for a Jedi, with the Separatists coming after him. After some hijinks, Farr meets Nute Gunray, who wants Padme executed, which starts making Farr feel a bit of regret that he joins this psycho and his weird army. Padme is about to be killed by firing line from some droidekas, though Jar Jar manages to commandeer a Quasal Ma, which Jar Jar calls the Boogie Monster. Anyhow, Jar Jar saves the day, and Padme, sensing the regret from Farr, allows him to change allegiances to the Republic without any consequences, with Nute Gunray being captured in the process. This episode knows Jar Jar's reputation and leans into it, but also makes him very, very lucky. Kind of like Bugs Bunny or something, but stupid and not clever.
Shoot them all!
He is still the kind-hearted idiot from the film, but just done so much better. It isn't just the show that does this either. Jar Jar to this day has kind of become a meta character. Like, everyone hates him, so we'll just do weird shit with him was kind of the idea. In canon, you have the Aftermath trilogy, where Jar Jar shows up briefly as an old jester in the post-Empire era, chastised and blamed for his part in Palpatine's rise to power. He ends up befriending an orphan and is a weird goofball, but the short segment in that book is kinda sweet. You also have Jar Jar Binks about Jar Jar's father, which was a comedy short from the Star Wars Tales comic series from Legends. There are many examples of this, and this is just another one. The setup is kind of sitcom-esque, with Jar Jar being a fake Jedi, and all the goofy shenanigans that ensue. Also, when Jar Jar befriends the Boogie Monster and calls him his new Frenza, I almost died laughing.
You saved me. You my new pal.
This episode is unreal. I remember rewatching this episode in like 2017 or 2018 on Netflix for the first time in nearly a decade and just thinking it was insanity. And my opinion hasn't changed since 2017 or 2018. This episode is great, and that's a hill I'm totally willing to die on. Cloak of Darkness sees Nute Gunray captured in the last episode, with the Separatist leader being transferred by Jedi Master Luminara and Ahsoka Tano with help from some Republic soldiers, led by Pharaoh Argus. Asajj Ventress is sent by Count Dooku to either liberate or kill Nute Gunray. The duo of Jedi hope to interrogate Gunray, but are failing to really get through to him. Ventress enters the ship and Ahsoka fights her, with Luminara coming in for the save before another duel where Ahsoka returns to save Luminara. Argus betrays the Republic and saves Gunray, escaping with Ventress following behind. Argus says he's going to get all the credit from Dooku, and Ventress kills him for the insult.
I'll tell him myself.
The Jedi return to report the failed transfer to Yoda and Anakin, Luminara realizing she underestimated the Sith assassin. However, Kit Fisto is on the case and chases down Gunray and General Grievous. This episode is solid, but perhaps a little forgettable. The saber fights were fun once again, but it just wasn't enough to really bring me to love this episode. I did like the turncoat plot, and it's cool seeing Ahsoka team up with another Jedi outside of Anakin and Obi-Wan, but it's solid enough, I suppose. This episode would also be written by Paul Dini, who worked on the Ewoks and Droid shows before he went on to what he's probably most well known for, which is being one of the key architects behind the Batman the Animated Series, which is a major show that sees Mark Hamill as one of its main antagonists. There you go. Double Star Wars connection right there. I think Lair of Grievous may be my favorite episode in the first season for many reasons, but basically, The idea is that the show is going to do a take on Alien, but with an evil cyborg Jedi killer set in the Star Wars universe. Kit Fisto and his former Padawan, Nadar Veb, land on Vesk, where they try to find Newt Gunray following his escape in the previous episode, tracking Gunray into a mysterious lair where they find nothing but a hologram of Gunray that turns into a hologram of Dooku. As it turns out, the duo are now pawns in a test for General Grievous. After an initial battle with Grievous that sees the cyborg injured, the Jedi and their clones go through the lair, with their clones being picked off one by one, before another encounter with Grievous that sees the brash Nadar Veb killed. Fisto fights Grievous, almost besting the cyborg before some of his Magna Guards come to back him up, and Kit Fisto escapes. Dooku is fine with the result, but is disappointed that his warrior failed to kill a Jedi Master. This episode is honestly so cool. I like Nadar, the Mon Calamari Jedi that seems like such a rare sight, and I appreciate that. Kit Fisto also continues to be so badass in the Clone Wars expanded media, and that it almost makes me forget how janky he was in the films that he appears in live action. Genuinely one of the worst film Jedi, turned into one of the best in expanded media, and I'll die on that hill as well. Nadar's brash and rushed nature is akin to Anakin, which is pretty rare, though unlike Anakin, who pulled a similar stunt and lost an arm, Nadar's attempt to rush into battle cost him his life. I do think the show somewhat lacks empathy for Nadar, kind of making him a bit of a prick the whole time. I guess he became a Jedi Knight and thought he was Mr. Gucci loafers or something. This has perpetually been one of the coolest episodes in my opinion. To add to my previous Alien comparison, Grievous's lair looks like it was pulled straight from some H.R. Geiger concept art, the designer behind Alien. Honestly, the look, tone, and fights alone make this some of the best moments in all of Star Wars TV. It's actually staggering how cool this episode is. Dooku Captured and the Gungan General is a two-part arc that sees Anakin intentionally get captured by the Separatists in order to get close to Count Dooku, who he hopes to defeat with this ruse, though Dooku, figuring this out, escapes with the Jedi pursuing, though they crash land. Dooku fights the Jedi, eventually escaping and trapping them, though as he leaves, he's captured by a gang of pirates led by Hondo Ohnaka. The Jedi are saved by Ahsoka and some clone troopers, while Chancellor Palpatine agrees to pay the pirates for Dooku, assuming the Jedi can prove that they indeed have him. Though the Jedi, upon meeting the pirates, are drugged and chained to Count Dooku, making escape impossible without the help of their greatest enemy.
I guess that pirate brew is stronger than we thought.
I only took a sip.
We were drugged, obviously.
A shrewd observation, Master Kenobi.
Though for some reason, Jar Jar Binks was sent to liaison the capture of Dooku along with Senator Karras. The gang is shot down, with many of them killed, and leaving Jar Jar in charge of a small detachment of clone troopers. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Dooku attempt to escape but fail, though Jar Jar's team is thought to be much larger than it is, and Hondo's men investigate, which causes hilarity to ensue, and Jar Jar and his clones knock out the power, giving Anakin and Obi-Wan a chance to escape, though separately Dooku does as well, running off during the confusion. I like this episode being an Anakin and Obi-Wan centric episode, since they are really the stars of the Clone Wars, and their dynamic in this show is fantastic. I said in my review of the Clone Wars movie that the voices of Anakin and Obi-Wan are great, but far more cartoony and exaggerated, and that's true, but I think it kind of makes an interesting new angle to the duo's relationship, and works in a slightly more over-the-top and fun way than we saw in the films with Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen. I will always complain about episodes where Anakin and Obi-Wan meet Dooku, though. I think the implication of the films is that Dooku hasn't seen the duo since Attack of the Clones, when they have their final battle in Revenge of the Sith. But if we go by this show, they met numerous times. This isn't so much an issue in the novels. There are brief instances, but nothing so direct as a duel or even directly confronting each other. I mean, this episode literally sees them chained together for days. This is the Darth Vader effect, something I kind of thought of while reading the 2015 Star Wars comic line as that was dropping. This is a phenomenon where you bring a cool, mysterious, and big bad guy to blows with the protagonist so much, with the protagonist usually escaping or defeating the enemy, which eventually starts to lessen the character's threatening nature. I mean, look at the Obi-Wan show. Obi-Wan's battle with Darth Vader is weird. Not only is it impossible to understand why Obi-Wan left Darth Vader alive, but it also makes Darth Vader look like kind of a huge bitch.
Goodbye. Darth.
I have less qualms with it here, but I still hate the idea, and I think this show is really the genesis of the overuse of antagonists in Star Wars, something Disney ran with on an unprecedented scale a few years down the line. I like that Hondo's ship is like a 1950s style UFO, which is a bit out of place for Star Wars, but I kinda love it. I know Palpatine is playing both sides on this one, but why the hell did they send Jar Jar Binks to make this trade? I mean, if they got Dooku captured, it could theoretically end the war or do serious damage to the Sith and Separatist cause, at least. And you may say, well, Palpatine is Sidious, he's controlling everything. To which I say, yeah, bro, I know. But my point is, wouldn't everyone kind of question why they're not sending a few Jedi to try to capture the most dangerous Sith Lord, or like a giant clone squad rather than a wimpy squad backing up everyone's favorite self-described clumsy guy?
Miss, clumsy.
You were banished because you were clumsy.
You mightn't be saying that.
The clones working with Jar Jar even send Jar Jar to negotiate, since they acknowledge he'll screw something up, which would provide them a distraction and give them a chance to do their mission. You would think the political ramifications on Palpatine for failing to incarcerate this super Hitler man, Count Dooku, would be wild, and honestly, with the team he sent, I would think everyone would totally put blame on him. Why'd you send Jar Jar Binks to do that? I also think we didn't need another Jar Jar episode this soon. Like, you gotta keep it sparse.
Jar Jar is a key to all this. If we get Jar Jar working, because he's a funnier character than we've ever had in any of the movies before.
Jedi Crash and its follow-up, Defenders of Peace, is notable for seeing the writing debut of Katie Lucas, one of George Lucas's daughters to the series and Star Wars in general. Interestingly, George's kids all did stuff in Star Wars in different parts of the production of Star Wars. Katie cameoed in all 3 of the prequels and wrote a few episodes on the Clone Wars, as well as drafting the story to the novel Dark Disciple, which was originally a Clone Wars episode before being retrofitted into a larger novel. Amanda Lucas cameoed in the 3 prequel films, and Jet Lucas cameoed in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith before interning on the Clone Wars and The Force Unleashed, and ultimately working on The Mandalorian and Boba Fett doing visual effects works. So while that was an aside, it is interesting to see how invested George was on getting his kids in on the action when they wanted to be, with Jet even being involved in the franchise after his father's departure. Anakin and Ahsoka hope to help Aayla Secura, who's been getting beaten up pretty bad by the Separatists, though in the process, Anakin is seriously injured, and it's in the title, Jedi Crash on the planet Maridun. On the planet, they meet T-Wat Ka, a native, and his people, who are peaceful, though sadly, despite not wanting war has come, as Separatists land on the planet. Droids show up and start causing issues, having a new weapon, the defoliator, that would kill organics and spare droids, with them threatening to use it on T-Wat Ka and his village. Eventually the weapon is neutralized and the natives team up with the Jedi to stop the droids, but T-Wat Ka is still unsure if he made the right move, helping the Republic. These episodes are good enough. The setup is all action, and it's fun seeing Aayla Secura doing more. She originated in the Dark Horse comics, and George threw her in the films to give sort of a wink to the Dark Horse guys for the good design. but as such never got much more than a death scene in the films. This is another interesting Jedi, and I think Anakin and Ahsoka's stuff was pretty fun as well. The second part, with the Lerman natives, was fun. They're kind of like Ewoks, small little Zaboomafoo-looking motherfuckers that pack a nasty punch, but mostly are just peaceful. I also think the peaceful plains setting is cool, and Lerman learning that unfortunately at some point you're going to have to pick a side and step up is both sad, but also an important message about isolationism. And you can see Tiwok Ka question if it was worth it, despite them only being alive since they were willing to stand up and fight. Though at the same time, that also kind of costed the village their innocence. There's some interesting stuff in this one. Trespass is the 15th episode of the Clone Wars and sees Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Captain Rex on the planet Ordo Platunia, a seemingly empty planet devoid of sentient life. They are accompanied by the senator of Pantora, Chicho, who hopes to run this planet. Both the Republic and Separatists have interests on the planet, but everything seems to be dead or destroyed. Upon investigation, they find a sentient species, the Tals, but Chicho thinks they should be removed, calling them non-sentient trespassers, which raises some eyebrows with the Jedi.
And as the supreme chairman and exalted ruler of Pantora, you will not command me to leave this planet or do anything else.
Chicho begins trying to wipe them out and calls it an internal Platora affair and tries provoking the Tals to attack to make his invasion legal, but the Planorian Council calls for him to chill. Anyhow, it was too late and Bro was killed in the process.
I died for our people.
This episode teaches kids the moral that colonization is wrong, even if the people you go up against are different than you. It was a good sentiment, even though it's an over-optimistic view of how shit would work in real life. In real life, Padme would get campaign funding from the Pantorians or something and would order the total genocide of the Tal's people. Perhaps the Plantorian Council would say that Orda Platonia was promised to them 30,000 standard cycles ago or something.
War, it is.
Anyhow, this episode is a politics one, and I think it's a unique little episode. I'm so old I like shit like this, but if you're hoping for epic saber duels, you'll definitely be disappointed. Think of this like an episode of Star Trek, the original series, but reskinned with the Star Wars characters. The Hidden Enemy is a weird episode. It's a prequel to the Clone Wars movie, taking place in the days before the film, but takes place directly after Cat and Mouse, an episode from Season 2, which is the prequel to the prequel Clone Wars movie. I guess linear storytelling is overrated. The episode takes place on Chistophis, which, after an action-packed opening that sees their surprise attack foiled by Separatists, Rex and Cody are trying to figure out what went wrong, eventually suspecting Separatist espionage, with Rex and Cody figuring out the traitor is a clone, and figure out that traitor is part of Clone Sergeant Slick's company, which includes, of course, Slick, along with Punch, Sketch, Chopper, and Jester. The group deciphering the traitor was the Sergeant, Slick, pretty quickly, though Slick starts causing issues. While all this happens, the Jedi fight Asajj Ventress. Not all that important, honestly, but cool nonetheless, I suppose. Anyhow, after a brief scuffle, Slick is captured and says Asajj Ventress offered him money and freedom to switch sides, with Slick feeling like he's a slave to the Republic and not wanting to fight with the clones anymore.
Yes, she offered me money, but she offered me something more important, something you wouldn't understand. Freedom!
The episode is good, it's kind of quick, lots of stuff packed into this episode. A big fight scene, a mystery of who the traitor is, a battle with Asajj Ventress, and apprehending Slick. Ventress kind of gets spanked by Anakin and Obi-Wan. She's punching up a bit there. I do think this story works better in the Legends timeline, since remember, this is canon in both. I think the idea of Slick being a turncoat implies more control over their lives as clones. In Legends, for example, Order 66 was something the clones did by their free will, just following orders that were passed down to them, where in canon, it was programmed into them. The clones really don't have much self-control. Well, I guess they do, but they have an override that I think in canon wouldn't allow for Slick to do what he did. Honestly though, Slick was kind of in the right and makes the Republic and Jedi look kind of bad. You get why he betrayed them, and he wants freedom. The clones are grown, then trained to be cannon fodder for the Jedi in a war against antagonist robots with no choice on joining or not. They are literally bred for war. The Jedi are in a similar situation for sure, but Jedi are also allowed to quit whenever they want. Plus, their parents usually give them up for the greater good. Still morally devious, don't get me wrong, but the clones are literally just slaves. This episode is one of the episodes that confronts Lucas's lore that was created for the prequels. And I think some of Star Wars' most important extended media shows us why, or confronts some of the weird bullshit George Lucas came up with in the prequels. The Blue Shadow virus and the Mystery of the Thousand Moons is another 2-part episode about, well, the Blue Shadow virus. Jar Jar and Padme meet the new Queen of Naboo, Nai Tuni, and her former bodyguard, Gagar Typho. Just an aside for a bit, as a kid, Gagar Typho was in my top 5 Star Wars characters easily. I was probably like 5 and just thought he was so badass for literally no reason. I also thought he was the same person as Bail Organa. I think that might reflect negatively upon me. Anyhow, this bandit, Nuvo Vindi, is a terrorist and mad scientist on the Separatist payroll who claims to have made a virus that everyone is looking for as the larger Republic drags its feet. Soon, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka show up on Naboo to help Padme, and the gang eventually find the mad inventor and capture him. But one capsule breaks open on the ship, trapping Ahsoka, Padme, and many of their clones accompanying them, forced to lock down on the ship with them inside to make sure the virus doesn't spread.
I hope that their sacrifice brings us closer to peace. It will, Padme.
Anakin and Obi-Wan search for a cure, eventually finding the Rasika plant in the Lego system, not to be confused with Legos, which is all that can stop the virus, with them setting off to collect it all as Ahsoka, Rex, Jar Jar, and Padme fight for their lives as they endure the virus. Eventually, the Jedi get the cure and save the day, of course. The scientist from this episode reminds me of world-famous Mike Matei's famous Minecrafta video.
Do you know what my favorite thing to do is in Minecraft? I love building bricks with Minecraft.
I am creating life. Also, you're creating life.
This is a unique episode, but I honestly don't really like it. The episode feels cramped with characters, and the virus chemical weapon may have been good if it wasn't just for the absolutely awful villain backing the whole thing. The second part is definitely better. Lego was pretty cool. The anxiety of the virus was somewhat intense, but the ending was very abridged. I think this could have been better. Storm over Ryloth, Innocence of Ryloth, and Liberty on Ryloth is a 3-part series of episodes. The story starts on Ahsoka making a fatal mistake causing the death of a bunch of clones due to her recklessness. Anakin tells her not to think too much of it, given the fact that he more or less taught her this with his own recklessness, and that it was a trap anyways that she couldn't have possibly predicted. While Mace Windu wants a status report on the aerial assault. Despite the heavy casualties, the Twi'lek people on Ryloth are dying, and Mace Windu and Obi-Wan demand they must rush the Separatist blockade. Anakin does a dangerous suicide attack with the Starship Defender, then allowing their other 2 ships to pass, with him escaping on an escape pod after punching the blockade to allow for an assault. Anakin breaks through, allowing Obi-Wan and Mace's fleet to break the blockade as well. Obi-Wan heads in on an assault of Nabat, but the Separatist general, Wat Tambor, is willing to use the Twi'leks as human shields more or less, and the Separatists eventually sent out some Gut-Kur to kill people. Though eventually Obi-Wan wins the day, with Mace Windu attempting to take Lesu City, the capital of Ryloth. Mace Windu goes head-to-head with the crazy-looking Techno-Union guy, invading Lesu, and taking it after learning to activate the Separatist plasma bridge and running their base, with Mace Windu just cutting people down and being cool. This trilogy is just 3 episodes of end-to-end action, and I think that has some warrant to it. it's earned, especially after the more thought-provoking episodes we had lately, like Trespass. And after the underwhelming Blue Shadow virus arc, I kind of liked it as a break. I like that each part follows a different Jedi, or set of Jedi in the case of the first part, but it kind of shows the three-pronged campaign the Jedi used to take back the planet of Ryloth and free the Twi'leks. Ahsoka's little arc, losing confidence after a failed attack, was interesting, and reflects well on Anakin's arc. The Innocence of Ryloth part is just my favorite. I love Obi-Wan, so I'm biased, but also the Twi'leks being used as shields and held in genocidal conditions is pretty interesting. The clones even call them tailheads, which I think is a not too hard to understand allusion to what happened in America post 9/11. I mean, I guess the slur or whatever directly reflects a real-life slur for Muslims that was casually thrown around at the time.
I don't think she's armed. Ah! Little tailhead bit me!
Anyhow, the clone troopers eventually learn that the Twi'leks are people too and befriends them. I don't know, the messaging is a bit weird and dumbed down at some points, but it's good to have a message for the kids about acceptance and not genociding people, I guess.
Not when I hold all the cards. It appears a surrender is unnecessary.
Mace's arc has some cool stuff, honestly. I like Mace Windu in the extended media, so it was pretty good. The season finale of The Clone Wars was Hostage Crisis, which follows a new character, Cad Bane, and a few of his bounty hunting buddies, their goal being to take some senators hostage. It doesn't take them too long to get those hostages and propose a swap for Zero the Hutt, though Anakin was on the location, which could prove to be a problem for the bounty hunters, that is, until Anakin realizes that he left his lightsaber with Padme, leaving him without a weapon. Eventually Anakin saves Padme and most of the senators, but Bane got his quarry and saves Zero from imprisonment. Cad Bane seems like such a weird character. He's a new bounty hunter that gives kind of a Clint Eastwood from his Man Without a Name trilogy, but you know, he's blue. Bounty hunters were underutilized in this show to this point, so it was important to put them in the first season, and I think Zero allowed for a perfect opportunity for us to get some local Coruscant Hutt stuff in the second season. The episode is solid, but nothing too crazy. I do like that Anakin lost his saber and had to figure it out without his weapon, and had to lean on other abilities within the Force. This show used a style inspired by Super Marionation, which was a popular style in the 1960s for TV shows. This is kind of the modern version of that, with big bobbleheads and thin little bodies that would eventually be phased into a more slender and realistic style as the show went on. I think this animation is good, especially the action, but it definitely took me some getting used to back in the day. Its very dramatic and stylized nature allows the show to get on some larger-than-life ideas and moments. It was really groundbreaking for the time and more or less pulls over well. Kevin Kiner did the music for this season, as he did all the seasons. I think this worked out pretty well, honestly. His music is similar to John Williams, though it's slower and more ambient. It falls into line with the film series' musical thesis, but it's also its own thing, which I ultimately believe should be the goal for any non-John Williams Star Wars music. I will say that in every video, that they actually achieved this goal. Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 1 is pretty good. The show has some superb episodes and some that are a little weaker, but it emulates the prequels and adds hindsight on some sour points like Jar Jar Binks, which I think was the most obviously tweaked character. The show added more longevity and importance to the Clone Wars by adding more personality to the clones and battle droids when compared to the films, and the action is pretty great to boot. I like the variety of episodes and topics we see covered, some starring Obi-Wan and Anakin, others starring various random Jedis, clones, bounty hunters, and more. And I think that's a cool way to show that this show is more or less filling in key moments of the prequels that the films didn't necessarily have time to cover within their fairly limited scope. Season 1 concluded on March 20th of 2009, and 7 months later, in October of 2009, the show would move right into its second season, subtitled Rise of the Bounty Hunters, which we'll cover eventually as we continue looking at this beloved show down the line.